Welcome everybody, and I guess we're here to talk about what is the true value of a Cisco CCNA or CCNP routing and switching certification. So the welcome slide talks about so why are you here? So I guess the assumption is you probably either support or want to support network devices. And if you want to support network devices, why are Cisco certifications truly valuable as opposed to, we'll talk about the other reasons why they're valuable. So the goals would be to get a basic grip on, the Cisco certification leads to a better understanding of exactly what all these terms mean and what the language is and how you go about getting a better understanding of networking by being able to communicate in a common language. And so the call to action is, hey, you ought to think about getting certified. So we start out with who is New Horizons, and then we'll get to the presentation, and then, like Anthony said, at the end we'll be willing to entertain any questions you might have, and hopefully we've got some answers for you. So New Horizons is certainly a proven worldwide training provider with remarkably flexible learning solutions. I'm in the process of teaching a class right now where everybody in class is online, but we're covering standard curriculum. Right now I have people from Boston to San Bernardino, and that would be pretty typical. So weekly I have students from all over the place, most of them in the continental U.S., although I have delivered classes that literally I had students from one customer that were on 4 different continents all at the same time. So we certainly cover a broad spectrum of topics, and industry leading. I'm a 34-year mechanic in a suit. So, but hey, we got really good instructors. So we are the largest international network. We have 2,100 classrooms and 2,400 instructors across 56 countries, and we do 3 million student days of training every year. And instructor-led training has migrated to the web. So we certainly, next week I've got a class with a room full of students, but the online live virtual delivery has so many benefits where you eliminate the drive time, you eliminate the potential long distance traveling, you still have an instructor online. So when you have a question, hey, you can ask it, where the old online delivery method was listening to a recording, and you just didn't have the interaction. So we certainly also do private group training, whether it's on site or online. So we have vendor partnerships with, well, just about everybody. So well, how about the presentation? So, is Cisco certification only for job searchers? Hopefully, that's a question that we can answer, because it's not. I mean, networkers, whether you're working on Cisco equipment or not, because of the fact that Cisco has the lion's share of both the routing business and the switching business, and they did invent the firewall, and they have a very substantial portion of the firewall business and voice over IP. They have the inertia and the critical mass to come up with really good certification classes. So Cisco certification is certainly for a lot more than just job searchers, and we'll talk about that. And then, why is using the correct term so important? Language is critical, and so we'll talk about why terms are important and why being able to organize those terms and, in order to pass a certification. And then, we'll talk about vendors a little bit and how you can use your understanding of both the terms as well as the way networking actually functions to determine whether, are vendors lying or, are they using things like strategic misrepresentation. So, the fact of the matter is workplaces are turning into physically and temporally dislocated collaborative environments facilitated by digital communications. In other words, many organizations have removed themselves from the real estate business. I spent a decade at IBM back in the 70s and the 80s, and boy, we had real estate. A lot of it, I suspect just in Chicago we probably had close, maybe even more than 1 million square feet of office space between 5 different branches spread around the Chicago area. That's changed. I mean, people are now working from home or working from a Starbucks or, any place they can get connected to the internet. So certainly, the network has permitted people a completely different kind of workplace. So right now, as of 2010, there were 5 billion devices connected to the internet, and by 2020, there should be about 20 billion devices connected to the internet. So back in 2007, there were a number of interesting predictions about things like successful organizations of the future will excel at acquiring, organizing, and strategically deploying global resources. Is that happening? I mean, that would be kind of stating the obvious. It's going on right now. The fact that there will be increased global connectivity, integration, interdependence in the economic, social, technical, cultural, and political spheres. I mean, look at the way you get news today. Look at, the way that everything is connected. So, does technology cause a consistently more rapid pace? And that certainly is happening. And then continuous dramatic changes in the labor force. So human capital will become a greater source of value, and the way work gets organized is changing with people no longer traveling to the office every day. So as workplaces dissolve and workers become more physically dislocated collaborators, the network that supports them and allows that collaboration becomes the key factor, and that is the opportunity for routing everything together. So I mean, there is definite opportunity in connectivity. So then there's the happening, and how do you communicate with others when you are trying to troubleshoot a problem or resolve an issue or find out why this doesn't work exactly the way it was advertised. So for some of the attendees, you may be multilingual, and for those of you that aren't multilingual, do you communicate with other people that have a different native language? I mean, frequently, just in normal conversation, it becomes difficult to communicate because terms may not be used in the way that you understand them or that they understand them. And in networking, it's the same thing. There is a language of when someone talks about a broadcast domain or a VLAN or an IP subnet. I mean, it's really critical that everybody understand exactly what those terms mean and how they affect the way networking is done. So another example of being able to understand the terms and language would be, use Google or Bing. And how often have you tried to search for something and then maybe you lucked out and you used a term that Google or Bing took you to a page where you found the information that you were initially looking for because you found a term and you went, oh, that's a better term. So you started another Google search using one of the terms that you found, and you get lucky and actually found the information you were looking for. But if you knew the correct terms in the first place, you're way more likely to find your way to the correct result. Certainly if you start with the wrong terms, then ever finding the answer is unlikely. So then there's the question about vendors. So, I mean, hey, I was a vendor. After carrying a service case for a decade for IBM, I had to go work as a marketing rep, long story, and a certain amount of optimism bias is required, right? I mean, have you ever sold anything before? If you tell, yeah, sorry, I'm trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent, and there's a problem with that because total honesty in marketing leads to lost sales because your competitors aren't being entirely honest. So, I mean, vendors aren't really lying. For the most part, it's optimism bias. However, there's certainly an amount of strategic misrepresentation as well. So, I mean, the point I'm getting to here is if you know the facts and you understand how networking works and you look at someone's delusions of grandeur, you can sort things out and figure out which ones really make sense and which ones are mostly blowing smoke. So, I mean, yeah, what does it take? I mean, if you plan to take, a Cisco track and wanted to achieve a Cisco certification, they have a basic one called CCNP, so the Cisco entry-level certification requires a certain amount of math, although, we're not talking calculus. We're not even talking about trigonometry. You're, really talking about basic arithmetic. You're talking about, so why do we see those numbers in IP addresses that go from 0 through 255? Well, there are 8 bits in there, but there's some real basic arithmetic that all it takes is understanding the way the powers of 2 works. So, and then being able to do basic addition and subtraction. And, if you can do it in your head, that's good. But for the most part, the arithmetic required to pass the Cisco exam is math that most people learned in like 2nd and 3rd grade. And then there's the language part. So, connecting particular terms and connector do we use and which pin is a 1.5 volts and which pin is ground for transmit and which pin is a 1.5 volts and which one is ground for receive. And what does a bit look like? And how do we achieve access? And then so then we get to layer 2 and we look at how those bits are organized into frames. And then you get to layer 3 and you learn about how logical addressing allows those frames to contain packets that can be forwarded more than once to connect from wherever you are to wherever I am, because all of you are using that kind of technology to get here. So, certainly being able to connect the right terms to the correct results And, hey, a little bit of drive doesn't hurt. So, if you want to succeed, it's certainly doable. Well, so all of the Cisco certifications. So, the first Cisco certification is CCNP, and then there's an additional exam to get a Cisco certified network associate. And then at that point, there are a number of different certifications. One of them that's very popular is the Cisco Certified Network Professional that requires an additional 3 exams. So there's an exam called Route, there's an exam called Switch, there's an exam called T-Shoot, and the routing exam builds on the foundation that you built in CCNA. So in CCNA, they cover the basics of routing and switching, but the advanced routing and the advanced switching is covered in more detail, and additional technologies are introduced. And then troubleshooting, or T-Shoot, is the exam on troubleshooting routers and switches when they malfunction and determining what the reason is. So basically 5 exams: the CCENT, the ICND2, the route, the switch, and the T-Shoot gets you a CCNP. So what do you think? You ready to fire up your career? Well, what kind of questions do you have?
So I have a question from Robert that says, I received my CCNA in 2006. Is there refresh training, or do I need to take the class or certification again?
Well, so, Cisco certifications last for 3 years, right, Robert? So your CCNA is no longer valid. The contents of the CCNA exams, and so the CCNA, there are 3 exams that you can take to get a backwards and sideways. There's 2 ways to get a CCNA. One of them is to take ICND1 and ICND2, and then when you pass ICND2, you're a CCNA. The alternative is to just take the CCNA exam, which covers the contents of both. So, I guess the first question would be, how much have you been working with Cisco in the interim between 2006 and now? If you've been, staying fairly current and you've been working with the technologies, then I would suggest you may just want to go take the exam. There is a class purpose-built for folks that work with Cisco all the time and already have a Cisco certification that may have gone stale on them, and that would be CSNACs. So the CCNA Accelerated, or what most people call CSNACs, is just a 5-day class that would cover the changes. So they have, so RIP is no longer covered in the CCNA body of knowledge. They've swapped that out for Open Shortest Path First. So we do OSPF now instead of doing RIP and RIP version 2. There's a number of other new technologies that have shown up. So does that answer your question? I'd say take the CSNACs exam and see how it goes.
He says yes.
Or you could sign up for the CSNACs class.
I have another question from Steve that says, I am a telecom admin in an IT department. With everything going IP, my boss wants me to gain certification soon, but my actual experience with networking is minimal. Even with New Horizons training, can an intelligent college grad over age 50 likely go from 0 to hero and pass the CCNA?
Absolutely. Hey, I'm 60, and 2 years ago I graduated with a bachelor's in IT, summa cum laude with a perfect 4.0. I mean, age has nothing to do with it, and experience is a huge benefit. I mean, the whole idea of ICND1 and ICND2, those two classes, is to take someone that has basic knowledge of computers and a high-level understanding of how networks work, and I suspect you know way more than that. So, I mean, yeah, absolutely. Zero to hero is, should be really straightforward.
He also asked, although my employer wants me to be certified, they won't allow a week away from the course. Are there any after-hours or self-guided options available? And I can actually answer that one for you, Steve. Here at New Horizons, we do actually have something called mentored learning, which is a flexible and mostly self-guided option where you can come in whenever you want, whether it be sometimes 5 to 9 or 8 to 12, whatever it may be. You get to set your own schedule. It's self-guided, and there's also a certified mentor in the room at all times. So someone who you can turn to if you have a question and say, hey, can you help me with this? Or you can also go back and redo anything you might want to do again or not understand completely. I have another question.
Anthony,
Yes.
Anthony, one other thing, I think we also have, I know several of the other Cisco instructors have taught evening CCNA classes as well.
Yes, correct, yeah.
Yeah, so, either mentored learning or online live.
I have a question from Corey that says, is there a big difference in content with the CCNA and CCNP versus the CompTIA Network Plus? Would someone need to have both on a resume for networking background?
Oh boy. Well, okay, so, CompTIA Network Plus is considerably more basic and does not include any knowledge or understanding of the command line interface that you would find on most routers and switches. So, as introductory material, Network Plus is fine. But so far as, I mean, if you're looking for employment or you're looking, for a promotion, there's a huge difference between CompTIA's Network Plus and, so I've taught Network Plus. I've been Network Plus certified since like about 1998 or 99, back at the very beginning of it. And the body of knowledge for Network Plus is a fraction of what CCNA is.
I have a question from Mark that says, what is your take on the CCNAX boot camp training courses?
Well, I like them. That's so similar to one of our first, questions. When I got my first certification, I was carrying a Surface case all day long, working for a Novell reseller. And I had worked for them for 4.5 years and, wanted to get my certified Novell engineer. And my employer told me that he couldn't afford to have me out of the field. And he told me that the certification was way too expensive, so I was in Chicago, and I went into a place that actually doesn't exist anymore, but into a place called Landmine and signed up for night schools. And, gee, it was a great experience. I mean, even working with the product, I learned a lot. But I personally prefer accelerated. I mean, if you have a background, if you're working with PCs and you're supporting PCs and you're working with networks and you're trying to support network devices, an accelerated is way better. And generally, the candidates that I get in my CCNAX classes, have some background with routing and switching, and then we'll have some holes where, there's a lot of people out there that do switches most of the time. and do very little work with routers. And then there's folks on the other side that's all routers and they never work with switches. And those are the perfect candidates for a CSNACS class because there's only part of the material are they going to have to really try hard to shove it in because half the material they're getting is something that they already understand and easy to assimilate. And it saves you a week.
I've got a question from Francis that says, are both of the CCNA and CCNP exams the same cost at $150?
They just published a new schedule. So there is a URL where they've got all of, it's really easy to find. If you go to Google and you type Cisco exam price, so they recently raised the price of the CCNA exam, which used to be $225, and now it's up to $295. Which, I mean, there used to be a price benefit in addition, to a time benefit of just taking the CCNA exam rather than taking the ICND 1 and 2. But yeah, so the professional exams are all at $250 now, and the ICND 1 and the ICND 2 exams are $150, but then the combined exam is $295. So other than the time savings, you only save $5 by taking the CCNA single exam for CCNA rather than taking ICND 1 and ICND 2.
So I have a question from, and I believe this is how you pronounce your name. It looks like Kaiser. Can you explain the two classes, ICND 1 and 2, a little bit further as far as the time frame and the cost, as well as if someone has a CCNA from 2003, do they need to just attend 2 to update their certification?
Well, so back in 2003, CCNA was quite different. So if you wanted to view the actual contents of the class, if you go to cisco.com, up on the title bar there's a training and events, and if you click on CCNA, it takes you to the CCNA page where you can see that the required exams are either 200-120 or 100-101 and 200-101, and then they've got links to the recommended training. So yeah, ICND 1 was originally, well, and ICND 1 didn't even exist back in 2003. It was just CCNA, but ICND 1, covered basic networking with almost no, So, I mean, talking about the command line interface wasn't in there. Talking about OSPF wasn't in there. So, they've amended in order to make the CCNENT a more valuable certification. So, I would say that ICND 1 is almost like CCNA was, so 22 years ago when I got my first CCNA. It covers all of the fundamentals of simple LAN, so the OSI model, the IP model, the terms and how they fit together. It covers things like network address translation. It spends a little bit of time talking about VLANs, talks about network device security, but includes a fair amount of iOS, which that was what, the 2003 CCNA was pretty much all about. On the upside, if you took an exam back in 2003, you may remember that there was the occasional fill in the blank on the test. There are no more of those. There are no more fill in the blank questions. It's all either multiple choice, drag and drop, or they now have simulations. So I would say for most people that's probably a bonus. But then ICND2, so ICND2 spends a lot more time with IPv6 now, and there'll be plenty of IPv6 on the exam. So that in itself would be pretty important. And then, so probably big chunks of what used to be route. So the route exam is starting to leak, well, actually both route and switch, which are both now at end of life. So if you're thinking about NP, you need to get rolling on it, because route and switch are going to move upstream fairly substantially. So we now have EIGRP and OSPF in ICND2, routing between VLANs, lots more information about basic device management, and the biggie is OSPF. So if you go to Cisco, up there on the top, just go to training and events, and then click on the certification that you're interested in, and you can see the body of knowledge that's actually in there.
I have a question from Sally. She is wondering if she needs to understand subnetting further. What kind of training does she want to do for that?
Well, ICND1 spends lots of time. In fact, the ICND1 classes that I teach spend more time than the book would have us spend, because once we introduce subnetting on Tuesday, we do after class work every night to make sure that, well, to pass a Cisco exam or to pass the real-world exam where you're working on routers, you just have to be able to look at an address and know, okay, it's on this subnet, and, oh, wait a minute, I know why these two routers can't talk to each other. Their IP addresses are on two different subnets, because we're using a 30-bit mask, and this one is on network 32, and that one is on network 38. Who came up with these addresses? And you just have to be able to see that kind of stuff, and you have to be fast. So there's lots of time in ICND1 spent working through subnetting, and it looks hard. It's not. In fact, subnetting is literally like second, third grade math. Things to, great way to start, get ready for subnetting, learn to count in powers of 2 on your fingers. So literally 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 1024. And be able to just buzz through that, because that's how subnetting works. If I take 1 bit, so 1 finger, 2. 2 fingers, 4, 3 fingers, 8, 4 fingers, 16. So, once you get past the initial hump, it really is pretty easy, Sally. And thanks for the question.
I have another question from Sally. What is the best way to prepare for the exam? And then after you pass the exam, what kind of employment, what kind of positions does this kind of put you in line for?
Well, Okay, so absolutely positively, the best way to prepare for the exam is the class. In fact, that's, I've been teaching for like the last 20 years, and there are two vendors that did education right, that everything that was going to be on the test is in the book. And those two vendors are, sadly, Novell and Cisco. So when I get done teaching a Novell class, and when I get done teaching a Cisco class, I can honestly say if you understand the material in the book, you can pass the test. Sadly, I'm also an MCSE ×5 and an MCT and tons of other, and I'm actually teaching a Microsoft class right now, and when we get done with the class, I always have a grocery list of additional resources for students to look at, because Microsoft, I don't know whether they're stupid or they think they're funny, but they seem to take great joy in, and if you look at the Born to Learn website, you'll see it. It just sticks out like a sore thumb. Oh, well, we think you should have experience with the product. Well, if you think they should have experience, put it in a lab already. That's not funny. So, Cisco classes are a wonderful way to prepare for certification, and what's covered in the class is what's going to be on the test. So then the other question Sally had was, what kind of positions does it lead to? And, wow. I suppose many students I've had in Cisco classes, one of them comes, well, a recent one comes to mind. I had a student that had multiple MCSEs, and they'd had their resume on Monster for a considerable period of time. And every once in a while they'd get a headhunter, but they generally weren't getting any interviews. And this student was taking ICND2, and he said, look, I jumped the gun. I'm taking the test on Friday. I've already passed ICND1. I've been preparing for this class. I know that on Friday I'm going to pass ICND2. And so I went ahead and updated my Monster resume, and this week I have gotten 3 requests for interviews. So, it's more and more organizations that are looking for support folks aren't, there's a sea of Windows certifications out there. And when they see that you have a Windows certification and a Cisco certification, it makes it very easy for them to move you to the top of the pile. So, whether it's desktop support or it's network support or it's, I'm actually kind of surprised because I personally have a number of family members that work for Illinois Bell, and it always seemed like Illinois Bell went out of their way to put blinders on people and prevent them from learning about technologies. And recently I've had a number of folks from Verizon in CCNA and CCNX classes. So it appears anyway that even the telcos are figuring out that certification has a value, and having people that understand more than their narrow frame of reference when they're lighting up LTE or they're pulling T-spans or whatever has value. So there's just a plethora of possibilities once you have a Cisco certification.
And I have one more question, and unfortunately, because of time constraints with Paul teaching a class, we're going to have to put a hard stop at 9:15 my time, 12:15 on the East Coast. But this question comes from Francis. It says, does the CCNP training gain you experience working on 6500 and 7600 series routers? I've never worked in an environment that had the higher end models to work with.
And the answer to that is no. and why would that be? I don't know. That's a really, Francis, that's a great question. And the future is high-end chassis-based routers, and there are lots of them out there, and it would be, well, it would certainly be an expense, on the flip side, it's different, right? I mean, it's not exact. Well, and that's, I mean, yeah. Students that achieve certification then, actually go work on it. And a lot of people that are sitting in certification classes will say, well, now wait a second, that's not that's not really the correct syntax, or why aren't there, and I guess when you draw out a body of knowledge, for something like route or switch, you've got to draw it around the most common denominator, and that's what they do. So you are absolutely correct, and no, I don't know of anyone that that covers that additional material. Cisco, it certainly wouldn't be Cisco authorized, because Cisco doesn't believe in doing that. So there is a very explicit body of knowledge, and it's not based on the big chassis. Sorry about that.
Thank you again, Paul. Again, I apologize. I know there's more questions, and I sent you messages if you get a chance to check that out. But we unfortunately have to take a hard stop so that Paul can get back to his class that he's teaching, and also hopefully maybe grab something to eat. But I wanted to say thank you to everyone for coming out today, and I hope you're all having a great week. And if you are interested, we have more webinars coming up, so check your local New Horizons site, and we'll have those coming up once a week. But other than that, thank you again for coming out, and we'll see you guys soon.
Thanks.